Okay, good afternoon everyone, whether you are joining us here in person, whether you are joining us online. Thank you so much for coming along today to the Emerging and Near Future Technologies Workshop, or as I've been informally calling it, How to Research What You Can't See. So we have a range of presenters here today, commencing with Ms. Chelsea Phillips and then Dr. Steve Snow joining us from UQ. I'll let everyone introduce themselves because I would forget all of the achievements and expertise, and then I'll round out the session at the end. So as you can probably see, for those who are here in person, we are planning on a somewhat interactive event. We've got some pens and post-its and things on the tables. Those of you who are joining us online, don't worry, you will not miss out. We have online environments for you to work in and collaborate as we go through as well. So you do get to have a little bit of a hands-on experience, but again, hands-on with things that don't generally exist yet. So I'll leave that as a mystery for how we're going to do those things. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ms. Chelsea Phillips. Awesome. Okay, hopefully that's working.
Yeah, the clicker should work for you as well.
Beautiful. Oh, there we go. Alrighty, hi everyone.
You might just need to click the slides first.
On the thing?
I'll actually click them so that.
Oh, so
yeah.
Clicks.
Yep.
Perfect, thanks. So hi everyone, my name is Chelsea Phillips and I'm a PhD candidate here at QUT. As a bit of background, so I come from a background in marketing, hence being in the business school, but also the School of Design, so more specifically in interaction design. And I find that where my kind of disciplines meld together there is kind of my research stream, but also does inform how I approach future and prospective technologies and situations. So today I'll be kind of going through the Wizard of Oz simulations. I'll explain what we mean by Wizard of Oz simulations, and we'll also do a brief activity that you can use to really pinpoint potential customers in the customer journey to then leverage and make your own virtual simulation as well. So when we talk about the future and prospective research is a reflection on the future which seeks to describe its most general structures with the aim of bringing out the elements of the method applicable to our accelerated future. And when we look at future scenarios in the past, it's really interesting to look back maybe 50, 60 plus years now and see what they were thinking our future would look like. And I can't help but notice, especially post-COVID, how relevant these situations are. As you can see here, this future scenario really does explore kind of that remote learning that looks very similar to Zoom nowadays, where you have a TV instructor, you have test questions and an electronic notebook. It looks a bit smaller these days. Or even this kind of feature where you have students looking to a board that is electronic, it's a video, and they're doing their own maths equations on their own single version of a computer. Or bringing it further, you can liken the kind of projection of future environments and situations like in Star Trek, where they have the communicator phone, and then you fast forward 50 years to the early 2000s where we have the iconic flip phone. So you can see how we have a tendency to project a future and actually meet ourselves there. Now, when we look at approaches to prospective research, there's three kind of categories here. First of all, we have forecasting, where we project the most likely future. We have scenarios where we explore alternative futures. So that was kind of seen there in those 1950s, 60s future scenarios. And we also have backcasting, where we project a desirable future and then work backwards to assess how we would actually get there. And that is really the focus of Wizard of Oz simulations. So backcasting doesn't concern what features are likely to happen, but it concerns how desirable features can be attained. And it involves working backwards, like I said, from a particular desired future endpoint in the present in order to determine the feasibility of actually achieving that future. So what we do in the process is we create a future design, we then assess it for feasibility, and then we look at what steps we need to employ to create that design feature in itself. Now, while this is all good and well, in the background, you've got increasing service innovations that are just that bit harder to communicate with participants. So as service innovations and frontline technologies do become more complex, there is definitely a need to provide representations of service innovations that are able to actually engage closer with real life. So no longer are technologies simply an interface that you click some buttons on and that's the experience. They're much more embedded in our direct environments and really hard to visualize with potential participants in research. And so there's definitely a need for using tools in an immersive nature to really understand the consumer behavior surrounding that focal phenomenon. So if we look at what currently exists in terms of visual stimuli in research, we know that visual stimuli does evoke deeper parts of the human consciousness compared to that of a written component. And so it's actually really useful as it does leverages components of the human brain that are more evolutionary ingrained. And using visual stimuli does enhance people's ability when they really have difficulty in verbalizing what they're experiencing and what their thoughts are. And then we look at it, the kind of spectrum that we have available of visual stimuli for research, you can see that it's very static. We have photos we might describe through diagrams or even maps and models. And the closest we get to in terms of that experiential component is scenarios, maybe fantasies, kind of dream-like things. And so where we kind of place the Wizard of Oz simulations is right on the edge of interactive as we're trying to get to a more immersive lens. So now we get to reveal why we call these things Wizard of Oz simulations. And basically what a Wizard of Oz simulation is that we present this kind of complex, very functional interface that users can interact with. But behind the scenes, it's a very, very probably simple PowerPoint that makes it look like we've coded everything and that it's super flash and whatnot. So in terms of the movie, The Wizard of Oz, the quote is, "Pay no attention to the man behind the mirror," because that's what we're doing. We have a visualization that's really high tech. You can see the wizard, the green face up on there, but in reality, there's a man behind the curtain just pulling different levers and whatnot to make it look like a magical experience. Now, while people may argue, well, why don't you just build the whole thing in itself? Well, it's actually quite costly to do so. And what if you find something in your findings that make your whole work and investment in the back end really a waste of time? So what the Wizard of Oz virtual simulation does is it actually enables a quicker and easier implementation of the front end system so that you can invest in the developmental efforts afterwards once you actually have your findings. And so what this does is by presenting participant with this virtual simulation, it links to the future in terms of that future scenario that we're looking to explore through backcasting effects, but it actually brings into conversation those past experiences. So people bring their everyday contexts and experiences and habits and behaviors that you can explore together in a very qualitative manner. And so as you can see here, this is just one example of a virtual simulation, a Wizard of Oz effect. And basically, it shows the Just Walk Out Amazon Go store, where you basically have no checkout. The customers can walk in, take any products they like, and simply walk out again. And a huge limitation of this research that I was exposed to was the fact that I wanted to test this technology, but I could by no means find an Amazon Go store or engage with Amazon in itself to bring that research environment to Brisbane. So this was an example where the person was able to engage in the space, look at the various different products, pick some products off the shelf as if they were actually experiencing the live store. And as you can see, they walk out of the store, they get a notification of their purchases. So kind of today, I'm going to explore with you how you would essentially make your own Wizard of Oz virtual simulation. And what this really does begin with is a service blueprint, where you do really map the customer journey, what the customer is actually experiencing, the physical evidence that is associated with that. So maybe it is an iPhone interface, maybe it is the transition zone of the shop. And then what's really important is to map the back end of it. So the technology that the Just Walk Out store uses is Ambient Intelligence, and there's a whole range of different technologies within the physical space that links back to the system. It's all working in the background. So while we're just designing the front end for the participant or the user to interact with, it's important as the designer to acknowledge what are the inner mechanisms that are all connecting this together, so you're actually acknowledging the complex system without actually having to code it. And so it's really this component that we expand upon when designing the virtual simulation, being that customer journey and the physical evidence part, as we need to explore what the customer sees, feels, experiences in order to generate a really realistic virtual simulation. Now, I'm just going to go through briefly as to how I created this virtual simulation in the first place. After I did map the customer journey and really did evaluate what touch points they were experiencing and whatnot, I jumped into Google Sketchup. Does anyone know Sketchup at all as a software? Yeah, that's a few. Well, Sketchup is something I used to play around with in class back in high school and whatnot. And basically, it's an architectural software that anyone can use for free. You just need an email address. And you have access to a wide range of databases within there that you can create physical environments with. So I initially, when I was scoping how I'd go about creating a simulation, I thought about creating it in the Adobe suite, with just Illustrator, trying to get the perspectives, but that takes a very long time, and it probably, with my with my ability there in terms of creating 3D environments, the fidelity would not have been adequate. So what I did is I created the whole physical space based on images I had of the actual Amazon Go store. And so then what I did is I actually went into that 3D environment and started taking images of what that first person perspective would have actually looked like. And then what I did is I took those screenshots and put it into none other than PowerPoint. Because one, I cannot code. I don't want to learn how to code. It doesn't make sense to me. But I do know the power of hyperlinking between different frames. And so what I did is I created invisible hyperlinks between different assets within the images so that when people clicked on certain areas of the virtual simulation, it would feel like they were walking through the space. So very cool. And just to give a bit of a zoom up as to Google Sketchup, you can see here the different features that you can use to design your own 3D space. And this is an example of the database that they have, a 3D warehouse. So I didn't create, thank goodness, all of these different shelving with the incredible detail of different products there. I simply was able to search through this database and import it right into then and there. Very cool. Alrighty, so enough of me talking about virtual simulations. I have a little activity that we might do, even in pairs, for instance, as this could be a bit more interesting. So one of the great things about the virtual simulations is that you're able to obviously project a future scenario and really unpick why customers might like a certain thing, why they might not, before it's actually implemented at full scale. And so that's what I did with the Just Walk Out Amazon Go experience. I wanted to know why customers were extremely interested or extremely averse to the actual innovation. And so I have an activity based on this scenario. So I want you to imagine that one of Brisbane's largest hospitals has announced that they will deploy service robots through their facilities by 2028. It's in about 5 years' time. The service robots will take various roles alongside nurses, doctors, and administrative staff with the aim of alleviating human workloads for increased quality of care. So what they plan on doing is implementing service robots, hypothetically, of course, and by service robots delivering medication to patients, service robots greeting patients at the emergency room for efficient triaging processes, and also service robots updating inpatients about their treatment plan. So maybe the doctor can't get to them, hey, your doctor's changing your medication, hey, you've been booked in for this surgery, that kind of thing. Now, in this scenario, hospital staff, having experienced extreme burnout from COVID, have really welcomed this initiative. However, prospective patients, so the customer, have expressed extreme aversion and anger towards the idea. So before substantial financial capital is invested in this initiative, the hospital wants to understand the mechanisms that underpin such customer, the patient, responses. They will then use these insights to design a service robot hospital experience that will be well received and accepted. So it's your job to use the virtual simulation to understand why patients are having such adverse reactions to the potential of service robots really engaging with them in their healthcare experience. So what you're going to do, and this applies to online as well, you're going to select a service robot scenario and illustrate a moment of the Wizard of Oz virtual experience that you would like to kind of exemplify that main interaction with the service robot. You can imagine it, completely up to you. in order to what think you would understand the aversion customers have to that overall service robot experience. So for the medication component, you could choose the moment of the patient actually receiving the medication from the robot and interacting with the interface. Or potentially the service robot greeting with the ER, it could be when they come to the ER itself, what are they presented with, that kind of thing. And so here I have some physical worksheets, as I feel like the good paper copy is very underrated these days for the in-person participants to work through. And then also online, I have a Padlet for the online participants where you will also have a copy of this to help you work through it at home. So I reckon potentially even in pairs, otherwise it's a very quiet room for a collaborative activity. Choose a virtual scenario that you kind of resonate with and just work through this worksheet. So in the first component, you can kind of see here, you're going to describe what's happening in the moment of the customer journey. So potentially it is the customer, so the patient entering the emergency room, being presented with a service robot. They may be experiencing the symptoms of a heart attack, hopefully not, and they're meeting with that robot. Then we're going to go through the physical and digital evidence. Basically, what are they seeing? Is there a physical robot there? What's the emergency room like? Are there other maybe staff members running in and out of different rooms? What is it that they're seeing? And then the fun part is the Wizard of Oz simulation component, where you're going to almost draw a screenshot of that first-person perspective of what the customer is actually viewing. So maybe it is the robot right in front of them with the staff running behind in the background. And then you're going to also describe how the user would interact in this moment with the Wizard of Oz simulation. Maybe there's a screen on the robot where the participant has to click on certain buttons within the virtual simulation as if they were to engage with it. All right, that was a lot of information at you, but I think we can probably break off into pairs potentially, or groups of 3 if you like. So I'll hop on here just in case. It's so great to see everyone talking about it. I thought we'd just kind of conclude the session in the last few minutes and really share some of the insights we gathered from this little activity and maybe explain your walkthrough process as to how you would design a component of your virtual simulation. So I know down here we had some really good conversations. If you don't mind me putting you on the spot, Alec. But I really liked how in-depth yours was and how clear you would actually create the simulation if you were to do it. Would you mind going through your process and explaining?
Yeah, sure. So I just created a little friendly robot guy here.
So he pretty much is the person when you first go in and meet him. So he has a little hat up here to signify that he is a nurse. And then he has a little scanner up here which can actually scan the patient's vital signs and everything. And then on his stomach is an interactive screen in which the patients can put in all of their details, and then that can go on to the doctors. And then based on their details, he also has almost like a little vending machine kind of component, which can like dispense like filament bags or tissues or like masks or anything like that that the patient might need based on their symptoms.
Definitely. And what components of that would you like Wizard of Oz-ify? Like what can they interact with on that screen?
So yeah, mostly the kind of the screen here, and then also as like different items are coming out is kind of what I would do, like just the whole process as they're walking in and actually just seeing the robot at the side as well would probably be a good one.
Yeah, awesome. That was so good. Would anyone else like to share their work?
Things on Zoom as well.
Yeah. Would anyone here like to online like to share their work at all? Have a look at the Padlet. There it is. Definitely. Oh yeah, so you have your work here. So in terms of the service robots providing medical updates for patients, so describe what's happening surrounded by a pretty stressful environment of health practitioners, quite stressful personal situation. Understandably, they're an inpatient and they're waiting delivery of information. They would see doctors and nurses, the robot, information and or health displays about the medical updates, and they'd see a call to action for information. So here we can see that there is an inpatient in bed and the robot there is kind of waiting on them. The interaction with the actual virtual simulation would be that they can see the robot is there with the doctors and or nurses. The patient is likely having one of their first experiences with the robot. They may be experiencing unfamiliarity bias with the new tech, might be feeling like they want to just speak to a person, might be nervous to share information with the robot, definitely. And so it's through those kinds of interactions with virtual simulation. So they may have interacted, the customer itself, with the screen of the robot, clicking on various things. And as the researcher, it's very valuable to go through as they're clicking on stuff, being like, what are you feeling? Why did you click that? And it opens up a really useful avenue for discussion there. Alrighty. So that's all I have for you today in terms of the Wizard of Oz simulation. I think this is definitely one of those methods where it's only until you get completely stuck into it and completely explore it for yourself that you do realize the really big benefits of using this in research, just to kind of ascertain any anticipatory customer resistance or acceptance of various technologies. Thanks so much for engaging, and to those online as well. I'm going to pass it on to the next presenter. Thank you.